It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears.
Hello and welcome to Wizards vs. Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing A Dark and Drowning Tide by Alison Saft. Would you like to do the plot or shall I?
I think it's your turn.
All right. We're in fantasy Germany. We're very specifically in fantasy post-reunification Germany, which puts us in approximately fantasy 1890 or so.
Just post,
exactly. Our main character is a Yeveni, and that is fantasy Jew, barely fantasy Jew, because everything else about the Yeveni is just Jewish, and none of the other words have been changed. She and her fellow grad student are being assigned by their mentor to go on an expedition to find the Ursprung, the source of magic in fantasy Germany, so that the King Wilhelm can go ahead and make sure that his unification of Germany remains strong, and he can head into the 20th century with a unified Germany behind him. No bad things will happen as a result of this.
Indeed.
So they head out on a boat with various royal heirs who are also on this expedition, and then a murder mystery happens, and we go on from there.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary.
Yes. So are there wizards in this book?
Yes!
Yes, there are.
Actually, most people in this world can use at least a little bit of magic. And so basically all of the characters are wizards of one sort or another. There's also wizards in the Wizards versus Lesbians sense.
There are indeed. We have grad student wizards. We have king wizards. There's wizards bound.
We have advisor. We have your graduate advisor.
Yep. And lesbians?
Oh, yeah.
This is a default bisexual world. So mostly, I think it's all bisexuals, honestly, but, you know, we round that up to lesbians.
Yeah.
So why should you read this book?
Well, some people like it a lot.
It's one of those.
Okay, so, you know, this is more of a what does this book do well? What does this book do not well? I do like that the author is making a real effort to not have everything wrap up cleanly, like to not have the politics wrap up cleanly. You know, this is an environment where there's no great perfect solution, and until the end where she kind of hand waves all that away, there's a sort of grim, realistic resignation about what it means to be a Jew in this time and place, and how constrained your options are. I also like that the author is willing to have our character be genuinely prickly and unlikable for understandable reasons, but that's something that you don't actually like. Just being genuinely kind of an asshole is something that, female characters still don't often get to do. Especially like this particular kind of asshole.
Yes. We have our second first-person tsundere narrator that we've done.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have the second appearance in this podcast of Kaiser Wilhelm.
Yeah.
My money wasn't on that. But there you go, 2 nickels, as they say. And yes, and this also sort of could plausibly take place in the same extended universe as Master of Jinn, actually.
Oh, it could, sort of. I mean, it's different kinds of magic, but...
Yeah, but Master of Jinn was all about different countries having different, kinds and sources of magic. And
that's true.
And Wilhelm does have his, German elves with him in that one. So, give it 30 years for his wife's influence on him to make, the elves integrated into his, worldview. And there you go. I meant Duchess Sylvia.
I like some of the folklore, I like that it's drawing on weird, like it has weird folklore monsters that feel very much like they're out of old fairy tales. I think a lot of them are out of old fairy tales.
Yes.
That's like there's some nice touches in the world building. And I suppose if you're just like really hard up for Jewish representation in fantasy, but like I think I would have liked this book a lot more 15 years ago. When, you know, when pretty much if you wanted Jewish lesbians in fantasy, you had the Dyke and the Dybbuk, and maybe Shira Glassman's work was out by then. But like,
yes.
when, you know, you really had to scrape.
So on that front, I would say like this book is trying to do so many things at once.
Yeah.
It doesn't succeed at any of them, but
No. But it's trying to do a lot of things at once.
yeah, but it's like if you want your dark academia, which is also a murder mystery, which is also a fairy tale deconstruction,
which is also a fantasy like a classic fantasy quest, and you've also got like Scorpion Rules style world leader hostage school,
and historical romance, and if you're into any of many things that we've done on this podcast, this book will fail to deliver it to you, but at least it will try.
Yes.
As for why you shouldn't read the book, this is possibly one of the worst ones we've ever done.
It is not.
I mean, wait.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is some hardcore recency bias.
Let me make my arguments when we get into it.
Okay, make your arguments.
I mean, the problem is that when it pulls off absolutely nothing that it's trying to do. And I also have a lot of problems with its morality, with the implications of what it has to say. I really, really don't like this book. That is all that I will say about it. And we can go into whether I'm too hard on it as we go in.
I feel like you're probably being a little too hard on it. I will, this is also sort of, I think if you go into it for vibes, if you're reading based on vibes, I think you'll enjoy this book because it's got some interesting vibes, particularly if, dark academia fairy tale deconstruction with, a little bit of kink and a sort of cinnamon roll tsundere couple, sounds appealing to you, then, you will enjoy this book if you read based on vibes.
Yes.
I think also another reason why this seems like the worst book other than recency bias is that you and I have gotten a lot pickier.
It's true. I think we'll go into the thing is that the reason that I say that is because it bugs me on like 4 different levels at once. From the nitpicky, very nerdy place to the geopolitical place to there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah, but at least it's not boring. Like some of the stuff we've read has just been forgettable and boring. And like
I will give you that. It's not boring. So perhaps we can arrive at a Hegelian synthesis between the worst and yours and your simply not very good as we move on to discussing
I think that discussing the things that this, the things that the ways in which this book fails is going to be interesting.
I think so.
And also, I think if all the things that we have said this book fails to do, if you're willing to just settle for vibes, then again, I think you may enjoy this.
Yes.
Content warnings, anti-Semitism, kind of toned down anti-Semitism. Honestly, that's something that I can complain about a little bit.
Not getting somehow having anti-Semitism being central to the book and yet not getting it right, but in murder, and torture and poisoning and body horror.
Yeah. There's some good plant-based body horror. I do love me some good plant-based body horror.
Yes. Again, we've seen it before, but yes.
Yes. I wouldn't call it creative, but it's
right.
it was well described and something that that was a tiny little plot fragment that I enjoyed.
Yeah, indeed. I will say that there were little things about this book that I liked, and I
Yes.
will enumerate them for fairness' sake as we go further into this. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, it's a fairly, again, like, for something that's supposed to be dark academia, all about anti-Semitism and trauma, it's fairly tame.
Yeah.
Partly because it and actually, I think that this is for me, this is like the book's fatal flaw, is that it flinches away from ever letting anything get too real.
I mean, that's certainly a flaw.
Um,
Let's talk about some
yes.
more of
All
those.
right. All right. So let's go to the spoiler zone where we can dig into all the ways that this book disappointed us.
Yes. The zone, the zone. We're heading up to the spoiler zone. The zone, the zone. With an extra warning for Hebrew Christianity content. Although it's mostly accidental, I think. Okay. Before we start doing that, I want to say the one thing that made me kind of chuckle and be like, "Oh, that's good," is the little aside about rabbis arguing about having halakhic arguments about whether like elves and like nixies are kosher to eat or not.
Yeah, that was a nice touch.
That was fun. I liked that. um, so, let me just where even to begin?
I'm happy to start with complaining about some of the Jewish stuff.
Yeah, why don't you do that, and then I will talk about
You can build up steam for
yes.
So there's a couple different ways in which I keep grading Jewish fantasy and science fiction, or just fantasy and science fiction with fantasy Jews, on a curve, because I do really want more Jewish content in speculative fiction.
I had this thought. It was like, I was talking to Kiana and I was like, I think Alexis gives books, fantasy and sci-fi books with Jews in them, like 10 bonus points to start with. And I give them negative 10 points to start with, because I'm like, how are you going to fuck this up from the very beginning?
Yes. I mean, and I think that, this is just like back in the day, I used to grade books with lesbians or like with queer content at all on a massive curve, because
Right.
it was, it was rare, and just getting it at all. Unfortunately, a lot of the Jewish science fiction and fantasy that's coming out has this real flinch problem. But that is not, that, is that we've seen also with like cozies and a lot of other books. But okay, so some things that really bothered me about the Jewish stuff in this book. For one thing, this isn't even the best fantasy retelling of The Jew Among the Thorns. We should read at some point some of Veronica Chenot's short stories. But like, because and I feel like that the potential there was wasted, because that is the horrifying thing about The Jew Among the Thorns, is that is that it is a fairy tale that just treats everything that happens in it as completely normal, because the idea that anybody would sympathize with the Jew is so absurd in the context of the original fairy tale that it can just be treated, it's the same as tricking the devil.
Sure.
And so the horror there is that like just utter dehumanization. And you've got this world where you've got your elves and your nixies and your creatures that can be tricked. And despite that, the Jew, and like, and you start off with The Jew Among the Thorns as like, your framing story. But that level of dehumanization doesn't show up. You're actually getting like early 20th century anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. You're not getting this, nobody asks Lorelai where her horns are. And the thing is, and nobody, you don't get the idea of people just sort of very cheerfully going, where are your horns? Because, even like, it's nothing personal. It's just, I assume you have horns, right? So like that sort of incredibly banal dehumanization is what I would have expected coming into a story that opens with The Jew Among the Thorns and is about a folklorist. And it just doesn't do that. Also, Lorelai Lorelai is a secular Jew, which is fine. Like, that's great. Secular Jews deserve representation too. But she's not. But again, she's very much a modern secular Jew on Tumblr or on Twitter. She doesn't think like somebody who was raised in a basically Orthodox environment, and who has sort of shrugged it off. There's she doesn't have any anger. She doesn't edit. There's no like rejection. There's no there's no habits of thought, really. Other than kashrut, and even with the kashrut, it's just pork. So she doesn't think like somebody who has grown up even surrounded by frum people, even though and thus who is not herself frum, but she still has like a great deal of allegiance. I could actually keep going, but now I think and I'll come back to some of this other stuff later, but now I think it is your turn to complain.
Yes, there are a couple of places that I can branch off from that. One of them is for a book that really situates itself very specifically in time. It has an awful sense of time, and that because we jerk forward in various ways. Like, if you're going to be period accurate, antisepsis is not a part of medical treatment at this time.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but that's kind of that's kind of nitpicky. You're allowed to hand wave that stuff in fantasy.
However, I mean, the thing is that you're allowed to hand wave the stuff in fantasy is like this book's motto, and it like drifts into places where you're not actually allowed to hand wave stuff, which is internal consistency. But let me get in. But that wasn't the point that I was trying to make.
Okay.
The more significant problem, like that's a nitpicky example to illustrate a broader issue, which is that we are drifting backward into Grimm's fairy tales, from the late 20th century. 19th, I'm also drifting, apparently. Like, making that be the sort of contemporary, attitude of the Jews with horns. But no, actually, because we're set in at the turn of the century, actually, not 17th and early 19th centuries.
Well, the Jews with horns is like also mid-century America.
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, we have a sort of royal court and a king in robes, when actually that's literally Kaiser Wilhelm. He should be wearing a suit, and it's and also we have steam technology, so we should be vaguely in a sort of steampunk cultural zone, but we're not, and that is echoed in the framing of what Judaism is, because we lurch forward into a completely unearned flashback that is invoking Kristallnacht. Just thanks for sprinkling that on your shitty book, incidentally. And we're then lurching backward into the Jew with the Thorns, and then we're lurching all the way forward into this idea that Judaism is completely an ethnic concern. Because it's not just, as you say, that Lorelai is herself secular, which is unlikely. She should at least be, wrestling with that. It's always your God when she's talking to the Christians. Not that they're Christians. They're just like...
Right. And that is the real problem is, how do you have... one of the problems is, what does it look like to have Christian anti-Semitism without the specter of the Christ killer?
Precisely. They're Catholics because they have saints, but there's no Christ. And one of the ways that she feels alienated from them is in their religiosity per se. And that becomes much more of an issue later on when she looks upon her ultra shiksa girlfriend, like the most shiksa anybody has ever shiksed. And incidentally, from these two books, it seems to me, if these are the two examples of dark academia we've done, apparently one of the features of dark academia is that there's an Austrian girlfriend in them, no matter what. But our Shiksa girlfriend, who is the Moon Princess, who has hair as white as snow, who is allowed to drink from the Ursprung, the source of the Danube, the source of Germanness, and power, or the Rhine actually, sorry, not the Danube, in a way that she isn't. Like the Earthsprung rejects Lorelei but accepts the Ultra Shiksa girlfriend. But she looks upon her Ultra Shiksa girlfriend and it's like, fuck God, this is the absolute. You know, it was never up there. It's right here. This is what I was supposed to be worshiping all this time. And then my brain exploded. Another thing this book leaves unexamined is the trope of Jewish people falling for extremely Aryan Gentile women. And what this says about guilt, and what this says about fetishism, and what it means that Sylvie is the bottom.
When they get to the Earthsprung, everything I like about the book crumbles, and through the rest of the book, and everything I dislike about the book multiplies. And that is one of the many, many things.
But yeah, so the point is that God is completely absent from Judaism in this book. Like, completely.
Right, which is, again, what I mean by this is very much a, modern, extremely online view of Judaism, where it's not even, it's not even that it's a purely ethnic concern. It's that sort of mild embarrassment around the, genuine religiosity, religious monotheism that still exists in Judaism today.
Yes.
But that you don't see among, the Jewish memes online unless you get into, Froom memes, which is a completely different world.
I'm not going to try to explain Fromm again after last time. Indeed. So what actual, moral valence do we pick up then for, what is good for the Jews in this story? And it turns out that what's good for the Jews is your bitter Jewish heroine who, because of all the ways that she's been abused and degraded, cannot see the wellspring of beauty, kindness, and perfection in front of her in the form of the Moonlight Princess. She has to be crucified. She has to get stigmata in her hands before she can recognize what's in front of her.
Oh my God, I missed that. Because, the Christian, I tend to miss the Christian symbolism. Oh my God.
Do you see what I mean?
No. Now I am no, that's a really good point. And, I presumably the author did not mean to make her book weirdly messianic, but oh my God.
It's there.
No, it is there, and honestly, now I want to go back and add content warning for accidentally Messianic Hebrew Christian.
The author is dead, we know as much, but we will not accuse the author of this. Either living or dead, it seems to us that the problem is more likely that she was recycling cool imagery from the general cultural flow without thinking about its implications.
And again, it's not even that I felt like she needed to be wrestling with it, because she's a grad student. Though I gotta say, for grad students, these people really act like undergrads.
They sure do.
But that's a pretty common problem.
Yeah. How old these people are supposed to be is also something that wiggles back and forth a lot.
Yeah. So it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me that the that it wiggles back and forth in terms of setting, because that's I feel like a lot of fairy tale deconstructions do that. So that might be something that's annoying, but it's also part of the genre that it's in, or the micro genre that it's in. But it's that. So, so she doesn't have to wrestle with it, but she doesn't have any reflexive habits of thought. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, all these characters have one trait in one mood.
For that matter, it never occurs to her to wonder how her family's going to feel about her intermarrying.
No, not at all.
Also, it's probably not even legal for them to get married.
Yes. When the queen asks her, at that point, her Shiksa girlfriend has become queen, or not queen, but...
Duchess.
When the Duchess asks her about her family, she reacts with disgust, because how could that possibly be important in the face of you not writing me letters? um, at the end.
She's been writing her letters. That was the one thing I enjoyed about the end, was the genuinely funny moment where it turns out that Kaiser Wilhelm has been reading all of Sylvia's love letters to Lorelai, because Lorelai gets them, sees they have like flowers and hearts on them, and goes, "Can't be for me," and passes them straight up to her boss.
Now, and on the one hand, again, like, that was genuinely funny. I laughed. On the other hand, that demonstrates that, what has not happened at any point in this proceeding is that any of the characters have learned anything. And
right.
if you want to write a fairy tale, it's kind of important that something is imparted.
Yes.
But let me go back to that wiggling around in history. Now, the reason that I'm getting on that is because that wiggliness is also present in everything else in this book, which, with one thing you can go, oh, it's a fantasy, it doesn't need to be specific. Oh, it's a fairy tale, you don't need to be specific. Where the rules need to be specific is a murder mystery. Yes.
No, the murder mystery, it was a terrible murder mystery. It's so obvious who did it.
It's not only is it a terrible murder mystery, but it's like, if you put a murder mystery in a magic setting, the magic must have rules. Like, this is basic. And the one thing that this author will never do is explain what the limits of this magic are. What can be done with this magic? What can't be done with this magic? If you can cool a glass in your hand as a sort of a flex at a party, why can't you freeze somebody's eyeballs?
Well, maybe, I mean, to some degree, maybe you can.
Well, the thing is that the extent to what can and can't be done here changes chapter by chapter, page by page, depending on what's convenient.
Yeah, but that's really not relevant to the murder mystery. Because, it's... The murder mystery is somebody drugged her and then used magic to drown her. And that is internally consistent with the rest of the magic.
And then stabbed her to throw it off the scent, to throw like things off the scent to try to cast suspicion on Lorelai, because Jews theoretically can't use magic, which also doesn't work with the larger Judaism metaphor. And they have to, sandwich in like witches and like people who get their magic by cheating later on and associate that with the Jews.
Which I assume is an attempt at recreating blood libel, but it didn't get pulled off, partly because there's no real consequences when people find out that like Lorelai can use magic. She has all this trauma about, letting her brother die rather than using magic to save him. And yet then she uses magic and to save somebody else, and there's no social consequences except that this means she's no longer removed as a murder suspect.
And that doesn't matter either, because nobody ever makes a serious attempt to challenge her authority, for Christ's sake. But it's like, what I'm trying to explain is like how this makes, like how this like just destroys any ability that I had at least to invest in the setting. Because it starts from the very start. Like, they fall in the river, which incidentally is supposed to kill you instantly, but it doesn't in this case. Lorelai uses magic right in front of, is it Sylvia? Sylvia,
I think. Sylvia von Wolf, right?
Sylvia von Wolf, Silver Wolf, Germany. She uses magic right in front of Sylvia to save her from the river. Not mentioned, nobody notices. They have to show up at the ball with wet dresses on. The only thing that magic works on in this universe is water.
Right.
They're both magicians.
Later, right, and in fact, as is the advisor, and in fact, later they do pull water out of the clothing. That was a complete failure of internal consistency that really did bother me.
Yes. And it's like, in the face of the stuff that it does with the Jews, none of this is important, but I'm just trying to explain how this book fails on every fucking level.
Yes, but again, I feel like let's focus on the big failures. We can save the little failures for sort of a nitpick roundup, grumpy zone near the end.
I mean, fair enough, but again, as above, so below, right? It's inconsistency on top of inconsistency on top of inconsistency, because nothing is thought through. And so I'm willing to accept that the author crucified our Jewish character by accident because the author wasn't thinking. Because, like, there are all these questions, like, Why don't you just go around the obstacle? Why don't you use your magic in this case? Why is it that the two characters that the author wants to be left alone together are left alone together under every circumstance with no explanation because she wanted to write a dialogue between them? You know, it's like scenes don't connect to each other. Things don't follow logically. It's the sinews are bad.
Yes, the pacing is terrible. And, you know, and the tonal inconsistency is, you know, of, oh, okay, we're doing dark academia. Oh, okay, we're doing a murder mystery. Oh, okay, we're doing a fairy tale. We're sort of doing a dreamy wandering through fairy tale thing. Oh, okay, now we're doing, you know, more of like now we're doing like heroic magic battle. And then, you know, and then we get to the end, where part of the thing with the end also is that the book is like trying to, you know, the book at least starts with, you know, part of like fundamental to Lorelai's character is that all she wants in life is to be an academic. And she's willing to basically sacrifice every part of her personality to do that. Which, you know, realistic. But, you know, to do that, she has to be a court Jew. And so that means, and, you know, that's a very specific thing she needs to do. And she has to succeed in very specific ways. And, you know, so fundamental to her character is this utter pragmatism when it comes to dealing, like, living in a Goyish world. And, and then this falls apart at the end because there's no consequence. Like, you know, this falls apart at the end partly when somebody's trying to lure her away with, okay, well, I'll protect you and also shelter your people. And that would be a little bit more appealing if she'd showed any real dedication to her people. But also, you know, she believes it and then she realizes that probably it's not true, and acts accordingly. But then at the end, how on earth, you know, she's totally willing. Now she's going to ditch her royal advisor court Jew job to become like the court Jew for her Duchess girlfriend / wife. And that's not going to like do anything to, you know, the ghetto in the main city. Like that's not going to hurt your family at all. Really?
Mm-hmm. No, the ghetto isn't her problem. Her problem is her own guilt. And once she gets over her own guilt, then, you know, whatever her family, whatever her people, you know, whatever her religion, if she even had one. It's the ghosts that were haunting her that then like forgive her, you know. That's the important thing.
And also like there's this idea that having gotten the position that she wanted, this thing was a magical get out of Jewish free card, you know, get out of anti-Semitism free card. But like actually being, you know, historically, if you look at this sort of around the world, people who occupied this sort of, you know, Jewish advisor role, it's one of the, like, it's this incredibly precarious role because as soon as you have a turnover in leadership, it's like, great, well, we know who to blame. Or just simply, you know, they get tired of you. They can just, you know, have you murdered. And, you know, and so the idea that this could be real safety, that works really well as her goal throughout the book. But then she gets it and it's like, no, part of the point is that she's got these blinders on. But she doesn't. Somehow her weird assumption that if she can just get this job, everything will be safe for her from here on out becomes true through the power of love.
Yeah. The power of love does a lot in this book, including giving her a complete 180 on Sylvia within like a chapter. The sort of tsundere love-hatred annoyance to like slavish devotion, essentially.
Yeah.
Within like 5 or 10 pages.
Yeah, which is too bad, especially, that must be so disappointing for Sylvia because it's very clear that Sylvia is into, you know, both being dominated and also, like, Sylvia is a masochist, and it's clear that Lorelai's contempt for her has been turning her on the entire time. This is part of like why we can buy that Sylvia has, you know, continued to have a torch for Lorelai despite Lorelai treating her like crap the entire time.
Yes, but that's too complicated an emotion to be explored.
I know, it's just that this must be so disappointing for Sylvia that, you know, suddenly she gets the girl, but suddenly the girl isn't willing to be mean to her anymore.
Yes. But that doesn't affect Sylvia because nothing does. Sylvia has one mood, which is cheerful. Like every character in this book, they have one trait which is traumatized, and one mood that trauma has caused to them. Um, anger, practical coldness, being a shit, which is Lorelai's, and being pathologically cheerful, and being kind of the good get along guy. So yeah, here are 5 things that trauma can do to you. But most people, there's more than one. When you're traumatized, you have more than one personality trait even afterwards. Yes. And in this one, it's like we're setting up our murder mystery suspects here, so they each have one trait because this book is a murder mystery. But it's not a murder mystery because we get rid of that, but we're still stuck with these characters that only have one trait.
And I mean, well, this is again, I think that you're getting this is the same flinch away from trauma as it is from anti-Semitism. Of the book isn't willing to show what trauma actually does to a person. Like, she has sort of, these obligatory, she's been triggered scenes, but they're, they don't really last beyond the scene. Like, she's not thrown off and extra shaky for, the next day or two. It's just, okay, she's been pulled aside, she's been talked down, and now everything is normal again.
Yes.
The fact that, like, her brother died, you get the flashback to her brother's death, but then her brother dies off screen, and you don't really get to see the emotional impact on her. You definitely don't get to see the emotional impact on her family, on the community in general, and you don't get to, like, really see, just there's, again, it's the idea that, okay, something, there's this horror going on, but we're going to pretend that it's just kind of, it's treating, like, genuine horror as angst, as, like, wump.
It's a sort of a white American, like, pre-woke understanding of prejudice that's going on in this book. Like, part of the thing that bugged me about the scene where her brother dies is that it's like her explanation of it, an academic who studies stories and folklore and has spent her entire adult life thinking about what it means that she's Yevonish. Her understanding of it is like some guys came,
right,
and they smashed a bunch of windows, and it's like, you understand that pogroms are political action, right? You understand that comes from the top, but no, she doesn't. And it's like, and I'm incidentally now working with the head of state, the state that in which the Yevony quarter, the ghetto, exists.
Right,
do I think about that at all?
This is what I mean by, like, she suddenly becomes, the Chamberlain of the court Jew, and the idea that, but, like, yeah, the idea that pogroms come from the top is not there at all.
Yeah, it's like people don't like Jews because they don't like Jews because the stories tell them to not like Jews. And if everybody just learned that these stories are wrong and that Jews are people, then everything would be happily ever after. And this coexists with her political understanding that if being the court Jew is being the scapegoat of last resort, because she understands this, but she doesn't understand it at the same time, in any broader sense, because she still wants to be that.
Well, the thing is that, again, she understands it until she gets it. And then suddenly this sort of hopeful reality that, like the sort of this hopeful denial of reality that's been coasting along becomes real.
And see, that's the distinction the book wants us to make. And again, this is like who the Ursprung accepts and rejects. The Ursprung rejects Lorelai because she's a Jew, not really German. It accepts Sylvie because she is the most, she is the most folklore German, fairy tale German that's ever Germaned, or Austrian if you prefer. And it rejects Adelheid because Adelheid is a pragmatist. Adelheid is Adelheid is the cartoon movie leftist, the terrorist that you fight at the end of the action movie who has to be sympathetic because you need your villains to be sympathetic. So she lays out like all of her very good points and then gets killed because she's a murderer, which is, and actually striking against power with violence is the one crime that cannot be forgiven. And so the difference between Wilhelm, who is a bad person, And Sylvie, who is going to be the power, is that she's a good person and that she respects nature, the earth, the soil, the water, in a way that Wilhelm doesn't. And if the Jew can just get on board with that, then the Jew will be fine.
Yes. I mean, also, this book starts out being like, let's be skeptical about monarchy, and ends with, no, actually, hereditary royalty is fine. You just have to, pick the right one.
Exactly. This book is extremely conservative and also messianic. And the fact that it's pretending not to be is really, really bugs me. So yeah, that's why I think this is one of the worst books that we've done. It fails on it fails on the political level. It fails on the level of talking about Jews. It fails on the level of actual political nous. It fails on the level of being plotted. It fails on the level of basic internal consistency in terms of its system. It shouldn't have been fantasy, because this author clearly views fantasy as a way to just sort of cheat and not fill in the details. And also, a good 10% of it is just copy pasted from Grimm's fairy tales without really, doing much in the way of deconstruction or adding to it. Which
is, and unfortunately, that's the most, the folklore stuff is some of the more interesting parts of the book. Which,
yes,
it's like that didn't bother me because the folklore stuff was interesting, even if it's folklore that is already familiar. But again, I'm still not going to say this is one of the worst ones we've done. At least it was interesting. It does some things, and it has its occasional moments. But no, I mean, you've made a pretty compelling point here.
I'm particularly allergic to action movie endings. Another sort of trying to critique fascist thought, but actually being kind of fascist book that we did, which was the one with the woman who was brought up in the fascist space station. Do you remember what that one was called?
Oh, yeah. Some Desperate Glory?
Some Desperate Glory, yeah. Some Desperate Glory had exactly the same ending as this one, which is, or the same sort of ending setup as this one, which is the sort of very long and drawn out, and the villain explaining themselves the entire way as they die, but still having to die because they're doing liberation wrong, sort of an ending. And it bugs the shit out of me, partially because it's just sort of been the dominant narrative in American pop culture for since 9/11, essentially. This is a confidential message to Blake Snyder, the author of Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need. My friend, do you know what you've been responsible for? Do you have the slightest idea how much pain you've caused me? Do you know what you've done to our culture? I don't think you do. You're rolling in your money. But when you die, when your eyelids are torn off, you will be forced to see everything for which you are responsible. And it was sort of the icing on the cake. I started annoyed about the magic water, and it just went on from there.
It was actually one of the things I felt like was unfortunate was that when it comes to being vague about the magic water, was that you didn't get any good descriptions of it, because you could have gotten some really good visuals there. And she was willing to give some good visuals sometimes when it came to, some of the nature stuff, when it came to the tree curse. But how the magic is used is literally hand wavy.
I mean, what it felt like to me was this might have started out as a Kurosama fanfic. This is just water bending.
I mean, I don't think it's Kurosama because the personalities don't match up, but...
Yeah, I've never watched Avatar. But it is, however, just water bending, and explains it about as well as, less well, frankly, than a children's cartoon does.
I've never actually seen Korra, but I've seen so many GIFs and clips of Kurosami specifically that I feel like I have an understanding of them, but not anything else that happens in the show.
Fair enough.
I have a very curated Tumblr experience.
Yes. Yeah, no, I don't actually think that. But I do think that this did feel like to me that it started out as something, maybe just a historical romance. And then the fantasy elements were added for, zeitgeist reasons, because the fantasy elements really, we could have just gone fairy tale. We could have just been their magical bits. You didn't need all the water magic unless you really wanted to double down on German nationalists, Rhine Maiden Wagner stuff.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you could even have the Urspring and everything. You could just cut all of the water bending. And just have, you need the Urspring for magic for some other reason.
Yes. Because I feel like a lot of the more irritating, nitpicky things that I had about the book came from the decision to include that. Like, oh, we're using a steamship because it's too expensive to have a magic boat, even though this is the Emperor of Germany and all of the royal heirs that are going on this trip. It's too expensive.
That's actually, I think, I actually enjoyed that, because probably it is really expensive, and you're reunifying your country doesn't give you a ton of money to throw around.
I will accept that, but then why would a magic ship be any better than a steamship? And also somehow the steamship manages to stop on a dime.
Yeah, that was
and
weird.
The two women are having an argument, which just, no, that has to be, you're controlling the entire river by magic if you want that to happen.
Okay, so let's end on a slightly more positive note, and some of the things that the book does well.
Okay.
Just, we can keep going endlessly, but I feel like, again,
I actually have one more thing that I want to do before, which is not nitpicking, which is this book does another thing which always sets off my alarm bells and bothers me, which is the sentient non-human critters.
Yeah, which again is such a missed opportunity, because people should be viewing Lorelei like they're viewing the Tarnkappa or whatever.
Precisely. There's this great metaphor to be dealing with right there, and it just is not explored at all. And
especially, you open with the Jew and the Thorns. You're opening with the Jew as fairy tale, demon. And it exists largely for petty mischief. And then you have the Jew confronting a awful little fairy tale demon thing. And there's the entire metaphor is just untouched.
In the, maybe this book is smarter than we give it credit for, which this one absolutely is not. But, I mean, there are plenty of threads here, because what is the thing about Sylvia is that she's the only human. I'm going to say that the Germans are the humans here. She's the only human who cares about the feelings of the non-humans and wants to be friends with them.
Right. So of course that's how she can fall in love with Lorelei. But again,
but we don't get into any of the, wait, are you fetishizing or dehumanizing me? What's going on here? None of that is touched,
Right. The thing is that, I was not, that does not strike me as, that was not there present enough on the page for me to feel like the book was pulling that off, even if it is deliberate. And, even if you don't want to bring in the, okay, wait, so is it just that you really you really want to befriend all the things that are, because the way that she tries to befriend Lorelei isn't the way that she tries to befriend all the other non-humans.
This is true, yes.
With them, including, with them, she learns about their customs.
Exactly. She tries to communicate to them in her own language, and she's completely oblivious about what being a Jew even means in this culture somehow, despite, Lorelei being her best friend, basically.
She doesn't even notice, she does not even notice when everyone gets fed a pile of pork dumplings. That was a nice little moment.
Nor does she understand it when they assume that Lorelei has money, and because they want her to pay for the hotel room because he's a Jew. And that goes straight over Sylvia's head also.
Right. But no, specifically because with the pork dumplings, there's the one guy who's Lorelei's friend, who's the snarky merchant kid. And he, as the closest thing that, these royal kids have to an outsider, he does notice and scrapes all of his cabbage onto her plate.
Yes.
But Sylvie doesn't, even though, again, she's observant enough to learn how to sing to Nixies and learn, what the magical horses need and what the like evil dryads, how to like communicate with the evil dryads. But despite, she's been in love with Lorelai for years apparently, and does not notice that Lorelai isn't eating her pork dumplings.
Uh-huh. Oh, and also, of course, during the climactic sequence, we get the reappearance of the magical non-human, whose whole existence is actually about tricking people and making them feel bad. He's just there, just to remind you that's his natural state as a species.
Which, well, the thing is that didn't bother me super much, because it was like, oh, okay, that was actually a rare example of this book setting something up and then following through on it later.
You're right. You're right.
So
she needs to give him his cup of coffee. They have coffee, by the way. Like, most of the stuff about the way this is set up is like, makes sense of Germany's an isolationist backwater, but coffee and tea, no problem getting those. Anywho.
Well, you can't have academia without coffee. But no, like that was, that was set up. It's not even the coffee. Like, it's very set up. What can he do? He can mimic other faces. Oh, look, suddenly her ability, that is also, it's the one thing that Lorelai actually learns, is to not be a dick to this one particular inhuman creature.
Awesome. This book manages a second act callback before the action movie ending. Congratulations.
Well, it's part of the action movie ending. Like, it distracts Adelheid so that she can get killed.
Yes, the part of the book that is right from Screenwriting 101 does manage to kind of, hold together. By the way, this also implies to everybody who's trying to be Blake Snyder, including all of the people who followed us on B-Sky, who are absolutely not listening to this, but who purport to teach people how to write the perfect plot line. I hope you all drown in a cesspit.
Right, no, that one holds together, except that, again, the fact that the Jew is working with the, magical imposter trickster figure to disrupt what is otherwise this honorable magic duel, and nobody has emotions about this. Like, this could be a triumphant moment of, look, ha ha ha, all of this stuff, I'm finally weaponizing all of these stereotypes against me with this other creature who, I have been previously treating with all the, the same contempt that everybody treats me, but now we are teaming up to defeat the bad guy. But it doesn't. There's no moment of recognition there. There's no moment of triumph. There's no moment of, there's no moment of like chagrin of, oh, I actually am falling into this stereotype. None of it.
Yeah. And you know why I think that is? I think it's because this book doesn't understand anti-Semitism
at all. No, this is absolutely high school or middle school history read about the Holocaust and, unit on the Holocaust, plus like, people complaining about stuff that has happened to them in the last 30 years. Understanding of anti-Semitism. Without even understanding like the actual historical roots of the anti-Semitism that exists now.
Yes.
Like, it's just generic prejudice.
It's like somebody read the Grimm fairy tales, found The Jew and the Thorns, was upset by it, and then made a book about how the stories are the problem. But
you could swap out Lorelai for any other marginalized, religion or ethnicity or anything, and it still works, which doesn't really work with anti-Semitism, because like there's specific features of anti-Semitism.
Indeed. But before we shouldn't crack that one open, I think, at this point. Let's navigate back to some of the things that we liked about the book, as you said, now that I've finally gotten everything that was on my list off my chest.
See, and this is why I didn't want to spend too much time nitpicking, is because there's some like such deep, real problems that,
Well, I wanted to lay out my argument that this is a terrible book even without those problems.
And to be fair, you did a good job of it. Well argued. I mean, mostly I feel like you won that argument when you pointed out that the Jew gets stigmatted. But also, no, I mean, the more I talk about this book, the more angry I am at it. So I think I concede this one. You're right. I'm not sure this is the worst, but this is definitely bottom 5.
I'll accept that. Thank you.
Okay, so some things that it did well. I thought that most of the appearances of the non-humans, like, that was because it was just drawing on actual folklore. I think that was where the physical descriptions got better.
Agreed.
And you got some like good visuals.
Agreed. I thought that of the characters, I thought the merchant son was the best of the characters that we had.
Yes, absolutely.
Because he's kind of complicated and sort of works against his own...
He has like 3 personality traits.
Exactly, and he's funny also, which is something that is also not very present elsewhere.
It was a real missed opportunity. I wanted to see more of like his and Lorelai's bitchy friendship, because the few moments we get of that are some of the, best character moments in the book.
I kind of wish the thing that had happened to him had happened sooner, because I think the botanist with an actual tree growing out of his neck is cool. And I liked him as a character anyway. So. Yes,
and I would have honestly liked to hear, I would have liked to watch him try and fail to deal with this with his, like, catty humor.
Yes, that would be good. But I enjoyed him.
Yes. No, he's the best character in the book. I think you're right.
Mm-hmm. I'm struggling.
This is another example. I can't believe we've once again read this book about lesbians and be like, they should have spent more time on the male characters.
It happens, and I hate that it happens. And it also makes me think, was this a het romance before, the zeitgeist got hold of it?
No, I don't think so, because he's so obviously the catty gay best friend.
I suppose you're right there. That is true.
This is, you got your Lam Wulu solidarity.
In the storytelling, it would not be Lorelai who was a dude. He could easily have been Lorelai's gay best friend, and Sophie is the handsome prince.
Sylvia is... I don't know, the thing is that Sylvia is such a, like...
She's extremely femme-coded, I will give you that.
She's extremely femme-coded, like, she is very specifically, like, she's basically an anime character.
Yeah. I will give you that. I think that... Oh, here's another thing that I like about this book. I think that it's cool that Lorelai thinks that Sylvia's Prussian dueling scars are cool.
Yes.
And I also like to see the Prussian dueling scars in there, because that's one of my favorite little bits of historical stupidity.
Yes. Unfortunately, there's a lot of... there's a lot of other, like, weird Prussian stuff that could have been in there.
But being brought up as a Prussian will turn you into a fucking psychopath. Speaking of, like, there's a lot of humans that are non-human in this book.
Yeah.
And I don't really think that's good either as a way to talk about people who've been through terrible trauma. In the end, even there's like Adelaide's eyes, because she stole from the spring, are not human. She's not human anymore. I'm like, fuck off.
Well, honestly, like, all the characters, both Sylvie and Johan are such anime characters. Right. And I mean, and the magic is, very anime. Like, all of this is very anime. Maybe that's why there's the random, like, doesn't make any sense and is accidentally I hope accidentally anti-Semitic. It's going to turn out that the author is actually, like, Messianic or evangelical or something, and I'm going to be so mad.
Maybe it started off as Hetalia fanfic, and these were all incarnations of pre-unification German kingdoms. The author is none of those things. And Axis Powers Hetalia is why we had to have discourse about why you shouldn't wear a Nazi uniform to an anime convention.
No. Anyway, yes. So we really missed out, I think, on the catty friendship. Let's see. I already said that the one part I liked about the ending was the love letters these such obvious love letters getting sent off to Kaiser Wilhelm.
Very funny. Incredibly out of place. But very
funny. Out of place, but, like, very funny. The thing is that, that could have worked in a different book where like Lorelai's cluelessness was just played a little bit more for laughs throughout. Which wouldn't have which could have worked. But because it's pretty much the only time when Lorelai's inability to tell that Sylvie is into her is a joke,
Yep, I'm afraid that that's the most we can squeeze out of this one, and I think we have now squeezed it until it stopped struggling. So, with that, hopefully something a little different next time. I think so.
One of these days there's always the Dyke and the Dybbuk, I guess.
We will find good space Jews / fantasy Jews, and if we can't find them, we'll make them. Yes, I mean, because part of the problem here is that, because the other one that I was thinking of that we could do when the Angels left the old country, but again, that's just set in. It's got lesbians. It's got lesbians. One of the 3 viewpoint characters is absolutely a lesbian. Like, that is fundamental to her personality. We have the Golem of Brooklyn coming up, but again, those are just Jews.
Right. Again, like, the thing is, come on, guys, get like, send in your even if it's sadly deficient in lesbians, send me your good depictions of fantasy Jews.
There were space Jews, sort of, in the Babylon Eye, and we didn't mind them because they weren't very specific.
And,
Isaac is making a nonverbal noise of trepidation about this, but yes.
And either we will enjoy having something new to complain about, or we will finally get... I will finally get some, some better fantasy Jews. I feel like I must have read stuff with good... I'm going to have to ask Lee about this. Maybe it's... I've read Lee's stuff, but come on. There's got to be something else out there.
All right. Thank you for...
City on Fire! City on Fire in Metropolitan. Aya is totally a fantasy Jew. We should cover that one.
We should actually cover that one. If you're going to indulge me and cover some of my non-lesbian favorites, then I can at the very least do City on Fire / Metropolitan.
And Lee will definitely agree to that one. Okay. Sorry, listeners. You don't care about any of this.
A little bit of business here at the end of the podcast.
A little bit of business end of the podcast. Thank you. What are we doing next time?
I think next time we are doing The Last Hour Between Worlds.
Oh, okay. I enjoyed that one personally.
All right.
It's another Seiya recommendation, so at least it won't be boring.
Indeed. And until then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.